each of our states here at Clean Water Action, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So the chat is open. We have you muted, but the chat is open. So if there are any questions that you want us to, answer, or some food for thought, please do feel free to use that chat, and then we'll use that for questions later on. So again, my name is John, Rhode Island State Director, and I'll pass it off to my colleagues.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Hewlick. I'm the Connecticut State Director, and I'm super excited to be here with you all this afternoon.
And I'm Elizabeth Saunders. I'm Clean Water's Massachusetts State Director, and also glad to see everybody. Many familiar faces and new ones.
All right, so we're gonna, we don't have time to go through everybody because our time this afternoon is short, but we do want to know who we have on this call with us. And so in the chat, which you can find down at the bottom of the screen, there should be a menu for you. Just hit the chat button. Make sure you're messaging everybody. But we want you to please type your name, what community and state you're from, and then the most significant step that you've taken in your life to try to break free from plastic. So just take a couple minutes and do that. Again, your name, what community and state you're from, because I know we have representation from all across New England, and then what is the most significant step that you've done in your life to break free from plastic. All right, so we've got, so me, I use diapers on my son. We've got some folks giving up plastic water bottles, bringing containers to stores. That's great. Making your own health and beauty products. Holy moly, that's a commitment. This is great, yeah. Using glass, giving up water. Yeah, these are great. Yeah, all steps that, we can take to have individual impact on lessening our impact and reducing single-use plastics, in our communities and in our lives. That's really great. So thank you all for your individual commitments to kind of walking the talk, I suppose. So keep those chats coming. But I'm gonna start off first before we dive into our conversation with some just some technical instructions, I guess. So you may notice that your microphone is muted. We ask that you please keep it muted during our presentations to avoid unnecessary noise. If you have a technical need or question or any other issue related to the workshop, you can use that chat to reach out to Julia Russell. So if you click on the drop-down menu, it says everyone right now. You can find Julia Russell, who works in our Massachusetts office, and she's going to be helping out with any technical problems. So if your video drops out or you can't hear us or something like that, just reach out to Julia. And Elizabeth and I, like I said, we'll talk very briefly about some of the things that we're doing in our own states to fight plastic pollution. But we really want to address some of the questions and issues that have that you may have that have stemmed from either watching the movie or your experiences trying to reduce single-use plastics in your own lives. If you do have a discussion question, as I said, just type it into the chat. And once we go through what's going on in our 3 states, we'll pick a few of them and we'll discuss them as a panel. So maybe we can start with Elizabeth, and then I'll go, and then Anne can go and talk about what's going on in Connecticut. So Elizabeth. Oh, and I should also mention before Elizabeth starts that we are recording this, so just so you know.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you again. Thanks, John, and thanks everybody for being here. And I hope that folks, I don't know if enjoyed is exactly the right word for watching the story of plastics. It's really not the right word for watching the story of plastics, but I hope that you found it. I know that I learned a lot from watching it. Like I have a pretty good sense for this problem working in this field, but I also did not know a lot of the details, and I learned, and I think it's really impactful. And I hope that everybody was able to take some things away from that. So I think one of the things that's, there was a lot of problem statement in that in that film. And so we want to direct our conversation more towards solutions. And so one of the solutions that I want to highlight, which was mentioned in the film, and I want to talk about a little bit more, is zero waste. So Clean Water Action in Massachusetts has been involved in zero waste campaigns for about the last 10 years. We have been one of the coordinators of the Zero Waste Boston Coalition, which spent 9 years successfully pressing the city of Boston to create a zero waste plan, which it released last spring, and we're continuing to implement that. And now we are working with the Zero Waste Massachusetts Coalition. I want to give a shout out to Janet Dominance of MassPurg, who is part of that also, who is here right now, and so that coalition is working on pushing the state of Massachusetts in the direction of zero waste. So what does zero waste actually mean? Essentially, our waste system, as we know, and as we very much saw highlighted in this film, is a very linear system from extracting raw materials, disposing of finished products, in a one-way system, and then as we saw, a lot of that piles up and isn't disposed of as sort of a misnomer. So zero waste is creating a circular economy that produces. It's about a full package of thinking about products and materials. So it's about producing only what is actually needed, doing so with non-toxic materials, and respecting the lives of workers and communities along the way, and then cycling those, it's reusing those materials as much as possible, repairing them, rather than having them be, having a big emphasis on repair and having a whole, so what does a municipality or a state do? They can build a whole, help support a whole infrastructure to be developed around reuse and repair so that things just don't go to the trash, and then cycle those materials, those that can't actually, once something hits the point where it can't be reused or repaired, have everything developed so that it is compostable or truly recyclable, not false recyclable like we've been seeing a lot of, so like we've been having for the last decade or so. So the idea of zero waste is really that you think about every aspect of the product creation down to disposable, and that a city and a state can put in place the infrastructure and the tools and the expectations that allow that to happen. And so there are cities that have really taken this on. Seattle, Austin, even LA and even Chicago have been reaping the benefits of zero waste planning for a long time, and we're working on moving that direction in Massachusetts.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So in Rhode Island, we've been working on a variety of different things, but one of our signature programs is something called Rethink Disposable. And now this is something that our California program office has developed over the past decade or so. It first kind of came into being in 2011, and they've really worked to develop a really robust program. And what Rethink does is it works with food service businesses, so restaurants, food trucks, cafeterias, and things like that, to take stock of the single-use disposable products that they use, and then come up with best practices and ways to reduce their impact, reduce the amount of single-use disposables that go out. And that's not just finding alternative products, but it's actually finding alternative ways of serving food. And so we launched our Rethink Disposable program in 2018 here in Rhode Island. In 2019, in July, last July, we completed a pilot phase in Newport, Rhode Island, with a total of 7 businesses participating and 2 that actually completed our program. And just a couple numbers, just from those 2 restaurants, in just the year that they were participating in our program, they diverted 121,745 individual single-use products from the waste stream. That adds up to about almost 600 pounds of waste, and that resulted in an estimated annual cost saving for those 2 restaurants combined of almost $2,600, which is a lot when you're talking about restaurants, which is a very slim margin business. And so we are, or were, poised to expand our statewide program. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 situation has really put the restaurant industry in a really precarious place, and obviously we can't go into restaurants and help them reduce their single-use disposables at this time. But once everything's safe again, we plan to pick it up. And it's important to point out that Rethink isn't about, like I said, switching from plastic to other materials. And Elizabeth kind of got at this in her remarks. That's really problematic. Alternatives often come with their own set of related issues. So plant-based plastics, you see that a lot. Like I'm made from corn. Molded paper products like clamshells, those are problematic. Plant-based plastics don't biodegrade like they say they do. They can only biodegrade in like industrial facilities that get hot enough to actually break it down. If they end up in our waterways or in our streets, they function exactly like fossil fuel derived plastics. Paper products like clamshells, they're compostable, but they're actually coated with nonstick lining. And oftentimes these nonstick linings contain, really bad chemicals like PFAS, which we've been hearing a lot about over the past couple of years. And so switching from one product to another doesn't do anything to alter the systemic waste and pollution problems that we have and that are created by single-use disposables. We want to switch from not plastic to an alternative product, but rather disposable to a reusable product. And we're also working on, obviously, a bunch of legislation to reduce single-use plastics at the statewide and the local level, including the statewide plastic bag ban and container deposit laws. And we're actually working actively to fight efforts by the plastic industry and the American Chemistry Council that want to create a loophole in our state's municipal waste incineration ban to allow the construction of pyrolysis or gasification facilities, which are facilities that basically incinerate plastic and creates, it perpetuates that linear waste stream as Elizabeth was talking about. It doesn't actually close the loop and create the circular economy.
Great, thank you, John and Elizabeth. So again, I'm Anne. I'm the Connecticut Director of Clean Water Action, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all. Basically, you've heard kind of some work at the local and market-based initiatives that our organization is working on that are really innovative and very effective. But I think as you saw from the film, what we also need is really big systemic policy actions that make sure that we are changing the systems for reducing plastic production and de-incentivizing the use of these toxic products and shifting the burden so that producers are responsible and not the consumer. So many of us are working on a policy that you heard about in the film, and we are doing so in Connecticut as well, and that is extended use. It's called different things in different states. We call it sustainable packaging and producer responsibility. But EPR is an environmental policy that literally shifts the burden of the harmful effects of products and product production to the manufacturer and not on those of us as consumers. So those types of policies are extremely important because they make the polluters pay and they incentivize those manufacturers to shift to more sustainable practices. And we need to be acting on all levels, local, market-based, and policy, to change this incredibly huge problem that we all saw from the film. So in Connecticut, just as an example, we have EPR policies for mattresses and paint. So you, as a consumer, can have, return paint cans, for example, and the producers of that paint or those mattresses will pay a fee to accommodate and deal with the recycling or disposal costs of that item. That then in turn incentivizes them to do more in terms of sustainability. So many of Clean Water Action states are working on all of these types of initiatives, whether it be local actions, market-based solutions like John reported, and as well as these policy decisions that are extremely important if we're going to address these systemic issues. So we're really excited to host the screening of this film and engage with all of you. And we want to spend the rest of the time this evening with you all to hear your questions, your thoughts, your ideas. And we look forward to working with you going forward on all of these issues, not only what we can do as individuals, but how can we enact these policies on all levels going forward. So we're super excited to have you, and we'll stop there and turn it over to you all. Turn it back to you, John.
So great. So we've already got some really great questions that have come in, and I kind of want to pose this one to you, Elizabeth and Anne, about, so Liz has a question about single-use plastics from healthcare facilities. You know, Anne, you as a nurse have probably, you know, have some familiarity with this. And then Elizabeth, you know, Massachusetts, well, and Connecticut, both do allow incineration,
Yes.
including medical waste. So do you have any insight into how we could try to dial back a plastic waste from medical facilities?
Yeah, maybe I can start first and then shift to Elizabeth. This is a huge issue. The healthcare industry is one of the largest producers, as I'm sure you're all aware of, waste. Not only plastic waste, but biomedical waste. It's a huge issue. We're really pleased that we're connected with Healthcare Without Harm, which is an organization that specifically is targeting sustainability in the healthcare industry. So we have some real opportunities to cross-pollinate this work to make sure that healthcare industries are shifting to more sustainable practices. And that's a really important and complex goal, because hospitals are, you know, as you all know, very highly regulated, you know, obviously have to deal with a number of contagion issues that are unique to their industry. But there are very important things that can be done, and we need to be driving this conversation and working with partners in all sectors of this industry to make sure that we're shifting to more sustainable practices. Elizabeth?
I think that's right. I don't have a lot to add. I think you drew together a lot of threads well on that question. So.
All right, thank you, Anne.
I will just say, I just want to name that there are a number of people on this call, on this Zoom conversation, who have a lot of expertise in waste and plastics issues. So if you at some point have something that you would like to add, just raise your hand and we'll, to the conversation from sort of a, answers to questions perspective, feel free to just raise a hand and we'll, it'd be good to hear from other people too.
Sure. Yeah, and I will say we have scheduled a half hour, and we have 9 minutes left in that half hour. But I think Anne and Elizabeth and I have already said we've agreed that we'll stay on a little bit longer if people want to continue this conversation. So just so you know, we're not gonna go dark in 9 minutes. So we do have a question about let's see. We've got a question that I can answer about alternative products and restaurant being more expensive. So two things on this, front. And so so if you want to switch, say, from a polystyrene clamshell to a quote unquote compostable or cardboard clamshell, which, as I said before, is generally coated with some sort of nonstick material that's pretty bad, usually containing PFAS. That's going to be more expensive. And so what Rethink Disposable does is we offer different ways for restaurants and food service businesses to actually get that product to their consumers. And so again, we're just kind of in the pilot phase here in Rhode Island, but the California program has already actually built this out a little bit more. They're working with the University of California's university and college like monolith to put reverse vending machines, for instance, in in cafeterias. And so the idea is that you pay a deposit for this like rigid plastic clamshell. You take it back to your dorm room or your table or whatever. You bring when you're hungry again, you bring that dirty one back, you put it into the vending machine, and then you get a brand new one out. And so you're continually using the same product over and over. It's sort of like if you like, I get my milk delivered in glass bottles from a milkman. And so we leave our milk bottles out, when they're empty, and then every Tuesday he comes and brings me new milk. It's the same exact idea. And so that's a really innovative program. It's not that innovative, it's just bringing back an old idea that, our California program is working with the University of California University System on. And so there's ideas like that. It's the same idea, getting a 25-cent discount when you use a reusable coffee cup and things like that. And I did see a question about COVID, how COVID has changed all this. And I think it's really important. So I don't know, Anne and Elizabeth, if you have any insights on how COVID has changed, or affected both, restaurant and business behavior and consumer behavior, as well as the policy implications from that.
Well, I will say that right at near the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, I think it goes without saying, but I will state the obvious, that we're seeing all the plastic bag bans that have been rolled back, all the the uptake in single use because people and disposables, and all the gloves and all the masks that are being thrown away is a big issue. I think that is, and there's one of the things that happened early on is that the plastics industry has done, that is not just because public health experts are like having these aha moments. It's because the plastics industry has done a ton of lobbying to take advantage of this situation and say, you need plastics, you need single-use plastics in order to combat this crisis and to keep people safe from the virus. And so that is, I think, one of the big issues is that we've seen just a lot of that's just one example of big industries that have sort of capitalized on this crisis and sort of put out a lot of misinformation to confuse people into thinking that we need to roll back our environmental progress.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth said that exactly right. There's been a lot of fear mongering and greenwashing misinformation from the chemical industry. They're leveraging this crisis as an opportunity to shift back to disposable plastics. And I would just say, and I'm looking at my colleague Henry Link, who's I see joined our meeting tonight, and he's an expert and a former DPH scientist, and he knows what I'm saying. Disposable does not mean sterile. So that whole thought process is a complete misnomer. There is no evidence, no research to show that COVID or any other viruses are transmitted from plastic bags or reusable bags. So it's just it's a concern and it's a fear that's being put out there to drive certain behaviors that is not grounded in science, and we can't fall for that. Of course, we have to be careful, certainly. And as a public health, I'm a nurse, as a public health person, I want to do everything we can to protect the public, but this argument is completely manufactured, not grounded in science. So I think we need to be wary of it and continue to move forward with our processes to ban plastic.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with all of that. We're seeing the same thing here in Rhode Island, several municipalities kind of rolling back their single-use bans and restaurants going to plastic forks and knives and stuff. And it's just, it's a result of a massive PR and lobbying effort by the fossil fuel, the petrochemical industry as a whole. And I think that ties together a couple different questions on this thread. So I just want to mention that Priscilla typed that you can't use your bag if you can't bring your bags in. Just put everything back in your cart and bag it up in your car, which is exactly what I do. The people at the grocery store think I'm bananas, but that's the way to do it. And so Priscilla, that's an excellent tip. And thank you for sharing that. I definitely appreciate that. There is a way to get your stuff out of the store that isn't in a single film plastic bag. And so we had a question about changing the habits of a few friends doesn't solve this. What are the large scale international, efforts and campaigns? So that's one. And then the other question was, or a comment was about how the glut of fossil fuels has, how is that projected to increase plastic production? And I think this gets to the heart of what the movie was getting at. So if we can bring it back to the story of plastic, we know, and those of so definitely Anne and Elizabeth and myself, who do policy level actions on this issue, and it seems like many of you on this call as well, engage in those efforts. That the petrochemical industry will do literally everything they can to maintain the status quo and increase their profit margins. And that is something that we fight really hard against. And it's really difficult to do that when our pockets are not as deep. And I think in Massachusetts, with your voter referendum on adding plastic water bottles to your beverage container deposit system, I think that was made clear. And Elizabeth, if you want to talk a little bit about that, you can. But I think that these individual level actions are really great. But Anne mentioned something called EPR, extended producer responsibility, and that's really the only way that we're going to get through this is by meaningful policies. We can't single-use plastic bag ban our way out of this. It's about having governments enforce regulations and give producers and brand owners a large financial stake in the end-of-life management of their product. Until that happens, I think the movie showed a graphic of somebody bailing out a running bathtub with a spoon while the tap is still on. That's a great image to kind of show exactly what we're dealing with here. And so as gas becomes cheaper and fossil fuels become cheaper, and they already have the infrastructure in place to pipe natural gas and oil to facilities to be turned into fossil fuel products, that can easily be changed over to plastic production, which is what they've staked they've hitched their wagons to that horse, because countries and states and governments all over the place are pursuing renewable energy and trying to reduce emissions. And so the fossil food companies and the chemical companies, they need to make their money, and that's what they've planned to do. It's no coincidence that we often hear that there will be more plastic by weight in our oceans than the weight of total marine life by 2050. And that's the same year that the fossil fuel industry has forecasted, plastics to either triple or quadruple from current production levels, right? And so that's something that we've got to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you either of you have something to that.
The only thing I want to add is just a specific answer to the question somebody said about what are the international campaigns around this. And so, the movie highlighted the organization Beyond Plastics that is doing this work internationally, and Clean Water is connected to that as well. And I also would just want to give a shout out to the organization Gaia, Global GAIA, Global Anti-Incinerator Alliance. That is doing really incredible work around zero waste and internationally. So just in terms of where the international work is, those I think are two organizations that to highlight.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So we've got a question about health, food safety and health laws. I don't really have any insight into that. It's something that we do run into in Rhode Island. But I don't know if Anne or Elizabeth, you have had any success or not successes trying to implement a bring your own program into a restaurant or coffee shop or something like that, and running afoul of local health laws.
We haven't done any campaigns around it. There are local health laws that do restrict such things. So just, personal experience is that if you are doing something where you put the food in the container yourself, you can usually get away with it, which may or may not be within the local health code. So, don't quote me as saying that. But if you are, but if you cannot give a container to a server and say, put the food in here, because they could be liable if your container wasn't clean. So just on the personal things you can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But,
same. Nothing to add. I agree. I think forums like this, us working to raise awareness and asking these important policy questions and working with our local health departments and our state health departments, those are this is all good because it's going to drive some of those questions and policy changes. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is the purpose of these kinds of forums. So we need to be asking, thinking critically and asking the right questions.
Yeah. So Alex has a comment, or a question rather, about MASS's 10-year waste plan, and whether or not other New England states have a similar system or coordination across borders. And that's a really interesting thing, is that in New England, we don't have that sort of regional collaboration. We see our states from Maryland up to Maine collaborating on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and the Transportation Climate Initiative to try to ratchet emissions down. But when it comes to waste, it's effectively the Wild West. And if you're familiar with rentier states, that's kind of what we've got here. So for instance, in Rhode Island, we have an incinerator ban, but there's nothing that stops non-municipal waste from getting in a truck and going to Massachusetts to be burned, or going to Connecticut to be burned, or something like that. We saw a lot of that with recycling markets as well. That basically before China decided to close its doors to Western recycling, we would recycled product would just be shipped to the lowest bidder, essentially. Where could we get the best money, the best value on a resale market, and then who knows what happened to it after there. And so I think that's a really great idea that maybe we could push for some sort of regional collaboration when it comes to our waste management. Because I know here in Rhode Island, we have a single central landfill that is forecasted to reach capacity by 2033. So that's only 13 years from now, which, when you think about permitting and siting and design and construction, is actually a very short amount of time. And so what are we in Rhode Island going to do? We don't have anywhere for a new facility. And so that sort of regional collaboration is something that I don't think is being talked about. It's not even being talked about within our little state. So I think that that's wishful thinking, but I think it's absolutely necessary, and if we want to be able to manage our waste effectively.
I would agree, and I think it's a great idea. And our governors are collaborating, as John said, on a number of issues. I think we should, maybe that's something that we should think about and pursue.
Yeah.
Great idea.
And then, so Carol has a question about accessing the movie to show to friends and family. So the Story of Stuff is the company, or the organization rather, that kind of made the movie. They have a bunch of different stories of, if you go to their website, you can watch a bunch of different little short videos, including the story of stuff, and the story of, I think, of bottled water, and the story of microfiber, shirts. The story of plastic is, I think, their biggest endeavor, but they're the ones that I would reach out to, and they're pretty good about getting their film out there and making sure it gets in front of as many eyes as possible. It makes sense to have a regionally coordinated EPR laws and bottle deposit laws. I think that's a great, I think more regional collaboration, especially here in New England, is definitely something that needs to happen. We don't even have a bottle deposit in Rhode Island. And so basically Massachusetts pays for people to, take containers in Rhode Island across the border, and get their deposits that way. So yeah, I think that regional collaboration is something important. And I think this brings me to a point, and then I'll stop talking, and if there's any more questions, or Anne or Elizabeth want to add anything, is that elections matter. And so Clean Water Action does electoral work as well as our programmatic work. And so in order to pass policies that will effectively, manage waste, whether it's EPR, whether it's bottle deposit bills, or some sort of more robust, public policy that is actually going to get at the root of our plastic problem instead of always trying to approach it from an end of pipe solution, we need to have elected officials in place that will pass these laws, that understand the importance and the urgency of these types of policies. And it's not just about plastics, it's also about climate change, and it's about exposure to toxic chemicals, and it's about all of these things that fall, clean drinking water, all of environmental justice, and very importantly, all of these things are interconnected and fall under the same umbrella, and we need to have elected officials in place. We could do all the lobbying that we want. We could have people show up at our respective state houses. We could have data and facts and all of that stuff. But if a lobbyist has the ear of a very important player in our governments, those policies are DOA. And so I think it's really important to focus on not only the advocacy, but also the elections piece of it.
To that end, I just want to give a shout out to Immaculate, who's here from the office of Senator Jamie Eldridge in Massachusetts, and just an example of the kind of legislator we want in office who will fight for these kinds of things. So thanks for being here.
That's awesome.
Can I actually, can I circle us back to one or two of the questions that were in the chat a little bit earlier? So Gail asked, with the glut of oil on the market, are you seeing an impact already on plastic reduction and increase in new plants? So if anyone else has data about that, I invite you to add that to the conversation, Anne or John or anyone else. I don't personally know about the plastics data on that front, but I will just say that one thing that we're definitely seeing as we move in the direction of a fossil fuel-free energy economy is that we are seeing on the other thing that petrochemicals are used a lot for is the creation of chemicals, plastics being part of that sector. And there is a huge growth in the petrochemical sector right now. And so plastics is related to that and is a piece of that. So I don't have the statistics on the top of my head, but I do know that that's projected to become enormous in the next decade or two, and it's a real concern. It's the fossil fuel industry, as they pointed out in this film. The folks that are the same companies that are making the plastics are also the fossil fuel companies, are also the chemical companies, and so it's all fossil fuel driven. And if we really need to be acting on the toxics, or we're going to keep extracting the fossil fuels and directing them to the chemicals and the plastics.
Yeah, and I would add to that that the I talked earlier about the pyrolysis and gasification facilities that the chemical industry and the American Chemistry Council are, kind of pushing in different states, including Rhode Island. And that is setting up the infrastructure to continue to take this cheap oil and produce more plastics. And the thing about these facilities is that they need to be fed. They are a voracious plastic eating monster, and they need a continual supply of plastics. And the plastics industry will say, oh, this is renewable energy or waste to energy. And it's effectively incineration. It creates, massive amounts of air pollution. They say it's not incineration because there's no combustion. They just break it up into two parts. This is very scientific, walk around that they try to pitch. And I've seen it there. We have a study commission in Rhode Island, that is looking at this issue. So I've heard the pitch, and it's malarkey. But make no mistake that the industry is setting up the infrastructure both on the back end and the front end to prepare for this influx of single-use plastic production, both here in the U.S., where we technically have the waste management capacity to deal with it, and then we saw in in Asia where they don't, what their rivers and stuff look like. And I think there was a question in the chat that said, why don't we see plastics on our shorelines? We absolutely do. Here in Rhode Island, we have one of our partner organizations, Save the Bay. They participate in the international coastal cleanup, and I'm sure many of you have participated in such a cleanup. And one of the requirements of the ICC cleanups is that there's actually data collected on the the physical amount, not the weight, but the amount of the actual number of different products that are collected during these cleanups, as well as you know, what they're made of and things like that. And so, so that data is available for any, you know, through any ICC collection site. And we're seeing a lot of that stuff. And we're also seeing microplastic pollution as well. And we think about, like, you know, they talked about the 5 gyres in the movie. We're actually seeing local waters that are being, you know, polluted with microplastics. And so that stuff is breaking up, like, as it hits our estuaries. We did a microplastics trawl in Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island in 2017. There have been trawls in the Chesapeake Bay. I know the Gulf of Maine is seeing some trawls. And so there's lots of research that's now being done on the impact of plastics in local coastal waters, and connecting the terrestrial policy, you know, implications of not addressing plastic with the, you know, that oceanic pollution. And so again, it's this these things don't live in silos. They're all really interconnected. And I think Anne had mentioned that we need to think about these in a systemic way. And that's really, really important.
So there was the questions, Debbie brought up the issue of green chemistry and whether green chemistry can be used to work with chemical companies to make items that are non-toxic and compostable and reusable. And so if anyone is not familiar with the concept of green chemistry, it's the idea that essentially that we can think about the full life cycle of chemicals, how much energy is used. So a lot of the time, chemical class, if you go to take chemistry in college or graduate school, a lot of that will just be about, if you put chemical A and chemical B together, what is chemical C and what are its properties and what can it do to, you know, advance some societal need. And so what they don't talk about is what's the toxicity of chemical A, what's the toxicity of chemical B, how much energy does that reaction take, and how much, what are the toxic properties of chemical C? And so it's just, so the idea of green chemistry is taking all of that into account. And there's a set of, I think it's, I don't know, 12 or 16 green chemistry principles, something like that. And so that is exactly a big piece of this is the work on the chemistry to make items that meet our needs as a society, that are non-toxic, that are and reusable. So that is a big piece of the product design that needs to be at the front end of this whole conversation.
Yeah, and I think that all gets back to EPR as well. And so the other thing that we didn't talk about EPR, extended producer responsibility, that Elizabeth just kind of hinted at or explicitly mentioned, is that not only does it make these producers responsible for the end of life management of their product, but it also spurs innovative product design and innovative packaging design and things like that. So they don't want to pay a lot for the management of their product. And so the idea is that they'll design their product to be easier and cheaper to manage because now they have to pay for it. And so we've seen these types of innovations come from companies, and some companies are doing it voluntarily, but you know, that's an uneven playing field. And so so that's the other really key piece that, you know, Elizabeth just got at with her, you know, with her remarks, that we need to think about, is that not only are we paying for the, you know, the cleanup at the end, but we're also designing products to actually be more, you know, environmentally and public health friendly, as opposed to just the greenwashing, to use the term that Anne used.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Bernie.
Yes, these geoliners, like they have at waste sites where they don't want leaching of garbage into rivers. Can they convert these plastics from bottles perhaps into the geoliners? You know, so you have a bad to a good, or I mean, there is good for that, right? For preventing leaching of, I'm thinking in the North Meadows of Hartford.
Yeah.
You know, those liners don't always work 100%.
No, they don't always work. I think you bring up a really good point, Bernie. And yeah, I think there are probably different liners that could be more protective in terms of not allowing leachate. However, I think we need to even think bigger than that in terms of reducing waste. And we need to take all these actions. So I think that's where green chemistry comes in. I think that's where product innovation comes in, and zero waste policies come in. Because whether we're putting stuff in a landfill or through an incinerator, invariably, something's going to leak out or get into our air or our water or our soil. And we need to minimize that as much as possible. So I think you bring up a good point, but we need to have a more holistic solution to our waste management. But yeah, no, good point that you raised.
Another point is the extruders. They melt and take the waste plastic and form them into little pellets to be reused. So maybe the innovation, the product development people that make these extruders that go into making plastic bags or whatever product they're going to make, and work with the Centers of Excellence for Davis Standard in Connecticut, that is one of the major producers of machinery for plastic bags. So go to the folks and get their input and work with them directly, because they are the manufacturers of the equipment that actually end up making all these things.
Yeah, great idea. Let's keep talking and figuring out some solutions.
Hello, I have a question. About a year ago, I started bringing reusable containers to restaurants for takeout leftovers. But the thing is, the last couple of months, haven't had that option. We're going into restaurants, and I've been taking out from restaurants, and they use mostly plastic containers, and I'm getting them piled up, and I'm not a very good cook myself, so I'm just wondering how do you reuse these? I tried bringing them back to the restaurants, but they don't take them. They say they're not sterile. But if I bring my own containers, I can take out leftovers. Any idea what to do with all these plastic containers?
Yeah, Henry, good to see you, and thank you for joining. This is exactly the problem. What you are burdened with is the product that is toxic, is harmful, is not recyclable, and you're left with, what do I do with this? And I think that's the whole concept of what John, our program about Rethink Disposable, was getting at. And this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It is a societal transformation that we have to drive. And the point that you just made, the example, the human example that you just raised was so poignant. These are the messages that we need to hear so that we can go and build these types of initiatives and broaden these campaigns to force, I'll use that word, force, restaurants and health departments and everybody else to help us drive systematic policy changes. So your story is an important one.
Yeah. Debbie Smith just on the chat said about Yale's green chemistry thing. That's one of the best in the country, and it's founded by Paul Anastassis, a professor there. And he has several other people with him. But it's important if we can try to lobby whoever we can, whether universities or the industry itself, to try to do more green chemistry research.
Absolutely, and we know Paul and that center well, and I wish they had as much money as the American Chemistry Council and the Petroleum Fuel. Because those scientists, those researchers who are doing such amazing, innovative work need to have the funds to transform our society. And unfortunately, they're blocked, as we are, as advocates, by these powerful industries that John mentioned earlier that are really hard to, their messaging is so sophisticated that you want to believe what they say, and it's just not true. So I wish we could have more funding for green chemistry and Paul's work and the green chemists of the world too.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's think more about how do we do that.
Okay, I think we're going to just take one more question, and then we're actually gonna call it an evening. So Liz had a question about education and where their plastics go, and I think Anne kind of got at that, is that that's got to be part of the solution. And so I can speak for Rhode Island, is that we've thrown tons and tons and tons of money at education, whether it's PR campaigns or marketing or going into schools and things like that. And we still have not seen any impact or much measurable impact on recycling rates, on waste diversion and things like that. So while education is a critical piece of the equation, it needs to be, it can't be the only thing. And there is no magic solution. As Anne said, it's got to be this suite of different approaches, from individual level actions up to like systemic policy changes. And so, yeah, there's no magic answer. I wish there was, but unfortunately it's not that easy. So, I think with that, I will say thank you, and I'll, Anne and Elizabeth, I'll leave it to you, but I do appreciate it. If you are from Rhode Island and on this call, you can feel free to reach out to me. I am putting my email address in the chat. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to talk a little bit about our action item, which I put in there. But thank you.
Actually,
nope.
Actually, will you talk about it? I think it is that part of your.
I can. So I put it.
I think you've worked on it more directly than I have.
Fair enough. I just didn't. I feel like I've talked a lot. So so we do have one action item for everyone still on the call. We have a take the pledge to reduce single-use plastics, and so I put that link up in the chat. I'll do it one more time because it's kind of lost its way there. But you can just fill that out. It's just basically I pledge to do these following things. And a lot of us, have done those things. It's, using a reusable water bottle, or talking to friends and family about, making choices to reduce their individual impact. But please do reach out to me if you are in Rhode Island. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule to be here with us. So I really appreciate it. And I'll leave it to Elizabeth and Anne.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you again, everybody, for joining. I've also put my email in the chat, so anybody who's from Massachusetts that would like to continue talking about this, feel free to reach out. There was a comment recently, I think it was Liz made the comment that just made a few comments that allude to the size of the industry that is fighting, that we're fighting on this. So every voice, every person's contribution to the effort is really important, because we are not going to win in money, so we have to win in strength in numbers. So your participation makes a big difference. So thanks for being here. Anne, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I would say the same. Anne, Connecticut director, anyone on the call from Connecticut, please reach out to me. I thank you for all your great work in participating this evening. Thanks to my colleagues, John and Elizabeth. Elizabeth said it right. People power is the way we're going to win. So we have to mobilize. We have to utilize these kinds of forums to spread the word and empower residents all over the country, across New England, but all over the country, to demand change. And that's what I'm really proud to work for Clean Water Action, because that's what we do. And with your help, we're going to make some positive impacts. So we're excited to work with you, and let's keep the conversation going.